Hello, friends. Before we start today's stories, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment which story you like most, where you're from, and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. October 31st, 2022. Began like any other Halloween night at Westbridge State University. Chaotic, vibrant, and just slightly dangerous if you knew where to look. I was 21, a senior journalism student, and I had been covering campus stories for the student newspaper since my freshman year. That night, I was supposed to have a rare break, but last-minute chaos pulled me back in. Our usual photographer, Liam, had called in sick, and my editor begged me to cover the costume party at the Vault, a converted bank building that had been transformed into the hottest club near campus. I didn't protest. I grabbed my DSLR, threw on a minimal vampire costume, just fangs, and a black cape over regular clothes, and left the dorm around 10:15 p.m. The streets were alive with people in every imaginable costume. Zombies staggering into witches, superheroes posing for selfies, and masked figures trying to outdo each other with increasingly terrifying outfits. The Vault was packed. Wall-to-wall students, loud music that shook the floor, spilled drinks, and the chaos of Halloween energy everywhere. For 2 hours, I photographed the costume contest winners, stumbled across intoxicated students making fools of themselves, and documented the occasional scuffle that broke out over spilled beer. And then I noticed him. He didn't belong. A plague doctor mask, aged leather, brass accents, glass lenses catching the strobe lights in an almost hypnotic way. His long black coat hung stiffly, as if weighted by gravity. People unconsciously parted around him, forming a small, unnatural bubble of space. My instincts screamed that something was off, but I reasoned, it's a costume, just elaborate. Someone into cosplay, maybe. I lifted my camera to photograph him, but when I looked through the viewfinder, the lenses reflected my eyes staring back. I blinked, and he was gone, evaporated into the crowd. I shook my head and continued photographing, though an uneasy knot had formed in my stomach. Around 12:30 a.m., I ran into my roommate, Evan, dressed in some anime cosplay I didn't recognize. He was completely wasted, barely standing, and his girlfriend, Clara, struggled to guide him out. She asked for help getting him home, which was on my way anyway. I agreed, albeit reluctantly. Navigating the dense crowd, supporting Evan between us, the night took on a surreal feeling. As we turned onto Harbor Street, a usually bustling avenue, the crowds thinned. That's when I saw him again, the plague doctor, standing under a flickering street lamp facing us. Clara noticed him too. She laughed nervously. "Creepy Halloween dudes," she said. But her forced amusement didn't mask the unease in her voice. I felt my chest tighten. We cut down Maple Lane, a dimly lit, older part of downtown. Broken streetlights cast long, distorted shadows across the pavement. The autumn wind filled the few remaining leaves. The night was unnaturally quiet. Evan suddenly vomited, ruining his costume and my shoes. I dragged him forward while Clara stayed on her phone. And then I heard it. Footsteps behind us. Slow, deliberate, heavy. I turned around. He was there. The plague doctor. And not just him. A second figure, then a third. Spaced perfectly, moving silently toward us. My instincts screamed. I grabbed my phone and started recording. Through the screen, my blood ran cold. Evan's face, or what should have been his face, was gone. completely smooth. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just blank flesh, stretched featureless. Clara screamed. When I looked directly at Evan, he seemed normal again. Drunk, pale, human. Through the camera screen, though, the featureless horror returned. We kept moving down Maple Lane, Evan's weight a constant pull, the stench of vomit lingering in the cold October air. The footsteps behind us didn't waver. Slow, deliberate, heavy, echoing off the brick walls like some dark rhythm. I dared a glance over my shoulder through the camera, and my stomach dropped. The plague doctor was joined by 3 more masked figures, each in a different, grotesquely elaborate costume. One had a cracked porcelain doll mask, with one eye missing. Another wore a leather mask stitched with zippers, and the last, something that looked like exposed muscle and sinew. They moved unnaturally, synchronized, as if rehearsed. My rational brain screamed that this was impossible, yet my instincts, primal and raw, told me that escape might be impossible if we hesitated. Clara was still talking into her phone, trying to assure her sister we were fine. I couldn't convince her to hang up. Her voice was shaky, but she refused. I grabbed her by the arm, pulling her down the alley faster. Evan slumped forward, almost tipping over. The alley narrowed, brick walls pressing closer. Shadows stretched unnaturally, blending with the figures behind us, creating something like a moving mural of nightmare. And then I saw the first journal. It was wedged between 2 crates by a rusted dumpster, partially soaked from a recent rain. The cover was black leather, worn, and when I pried it open, I saw entries dated back to 2016. Names, addresses, schedules, meticulous notes about parties, birthdays, even dorm room numbers. My breath caught. Some of the names were of students I knew, friends I had studied with. The handwriting was careful, almost obsessive. One page had been circled repeatedly. October 31st, 2022. Westbridge State University. Dorms. 2:15 a.m. I shoved it into my backpack without thinking, but the act felt like it tethered me to something dark, something alive. The footsteps behind us quickened, then slowed, as if sensing my discovery. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Clara, we need to keep going." "Don't look back." Her grip on Evan tightened. "I see them too now," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Why are there so many?" Before I could answer, the largest figure, the plague doctor, raised a hand and pointed directly at Evan. The rest of the figures fanned out, forming a semicircle around us. I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Thin, almost invisible threads extending from their masks, shimmering faintly in the dim streetlight, connecting them to Evan. "Threads," I murmured, my hands shaking. "They're connected to him." Clara's sobs became hysterical. I could feel it too. A pull, subtle but undeniable, as if Evan's essence was being slowly drawn toward the masked figures. I had no choice but to act. I remembered the journal. One entry had a note tucked in the margin in smaller handwriting. "The mask reveals the truth. Only by seeing through the false face can the echo be released." I rifled through my bag and found a cheap Halloween werewolf mask from earlier, the one I had used for a goofy selfie at the party. My hands trembled as I pulled it over my face. The instant the mask covered my eyes, the alley changed. The figures behind us weren't human anymore. They were burn victims, charred and melted, eyes wide with desperation. Yet, through the mask, I could feel their pain, their sorrow, and their pleading, not for vengeance, but for understanding. Through the eye holes, I looked at Evan. He wasn't there. Only a column of static, gray and white, threads from the featureless shape extending into both me and Clara. My heart pounded like a jackhammer. Time seemed to warp. I heard the distant city sounds of Halloween fade away, replaced by the metallic echo of chains dragging across concrete. A voice cut through the mask, raspy, hoarse, almost ancient. "Drop it. Let it go. You can't carry him anymore." I nodded, tears streaming. I reached forward and released my grip on the static form. Immediately, the threads snapped like broken fishing lines. The figures behind us froze, then faded into the dim glow of the alley, leaving only the night and the rusted walls. Clara and I collapsed against the brick, gasping for air. Evan was back, unconscious but alive, his face normal, pale, drunk, human. The alley had returned to its mundane state. Trash cans, wet leaves, faint graffiti on the walls. I opened the journal again. The last entry, dated 2022, had been scribbled frantically. October 31st, 2022. The echoes have been released. The tethered may survive if they let go. The masks are the only protection now. They hunt what remains. I locked the journal away in my backpack, too scared to look at it again, but unable to ignore it. The streets were empty. No footsteps, no echoes. Just the autumn wind and the occasional flicker of a faulty street light. That night changed me. Halloween became more than candy, costumes, and parties. It became a reminder. Some things linger in the shadows, patient, methodical, waiting for the unwary. And if you carry what doesn't belong to you, it will follow. Year after year, the chill in the air cut through me like a knife as Clara and I dragged Evan along the uneven pavement of Maple Lane. My backpack, heavy with the black leather journal, thumped against my side with every step. The faint glow of streetlights flickered, casting long, trembling shadows that seemed alive, stretching toward us like skeletal hands. Every instinct screamed to run, yet my legs felt leaden. Then I heard it again. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, almost taunting. Not behind us this time, but ahead, from the darker alleyways branching off the street. My heart skipped. I stopped in my tracks, clutching the journal. "Did you hear that?" I whispered to Clara. She froze, her eyes wide, hands gripping Evan's shoulders. "It's just Halloween, right? Someone's playing a prank?" Her voice cracked like glass. But I knew better. That sound was deliberate, measured, not random. The echo of boots on asphalt, faint but rhythmic, like a heartbeat slightly out of sync with our own. I raised my camera instinctively. Through the lens, I saw them. 3 figures, masks reflecting the dim light. One grotesque baby doll with a cracked face, another stitched with zippers, and the third, an indistinct blur of shadows and sinew. Their movements were almost imperceptible, gliding, not walking, but synchronized, unnerving in precision. I tried to keep calm. We need to move. Now we hurried down a side street, Hawthorne Alley, a forgotten path lined with abandoned warehouses. The graffiti on the walls glowed faintly under the flickering lights. Rusted barrels and piles of debris formed grotesque silhouettes. The echoes followed, silent for a moment, then footsteps resuming in perfect unison behind us. I remembered the journal. Flipping through it frantically, I found another note. "The echoes feed on recognition. Do not let them see you as you are. See through the mask or become tethered forever." I pulled the cheap werewolf mask back over my face, heart hammering. Instantly, the alley transformed. The trash, the graffiti, the barrels all became distorted, industrial, decayed. Shadows deepened, stretching impossibly long. The echoes behind us were no longer human, their burned and scarred forms revealed through the mask's filter. But their eyes pleaded, desperate, exhausted, begging. And then I saw the threads again. Thin, silvery strands extending from the static form that was Evan, wrapping around my wrists, Clara's, and anchoring them to the figures behind. My stomach churned. Every fiber of my being screamed to break free. I remembered another journal note. Drop the tether. Release the echo. Only then can the hunted survive. Clara was crying now, shaking her head, unable to comprehend what was happening. "He's right there!" she screamed, gesturing to Evan. But through the mask, he wasn't there. Only a column of flickering static, feet barely touching the ground. I let go. Instantly, the threads snapped. The echoes staggered, their burned, melted forms flickering like dying flames. They didn't pursue us further, yet I could still feel their gaze. Heavy, watching, judging. We stumbled further down the alley until it emptied onto Ashwood Boulevard, normally bustling, but now completely deserted. The autumn leaves skittered across the asphalt in the breeze, the streetlights casting long, harsh shadows. Not a soul in sight. Even Evan's form seemed human again, though pale and trembling. I dared to breathe. But it wasn't over. I noticed movement in the periphery. One figure, taller than the rest, stepping forward. The original plague doctor. He removed the mask. A young man, late 20s, stubble, exhausted eyes. Not terrifying, but worn, like someone carrying the weight of centuries of terror. He spoke softly, almost kindly. "You carried the echo too far. You've released it. That column you held, it was never him. It's a shadow of what was taken. Every Halloween, the echoes hunt. They need the tether to find their way back. You were lucky." I swallowed hard, voice shaking. "But the others?" He gestured at the shadows fading into the alley behind us. "They go back where they came from. But each year, they seek recognition. Faces, names, routines. That's how they find their prey." Clara clung to Evan, sobbing quietly. I reached into my backpack, fingers brushing the journal. It felt heavier now, laden with dread. "The masks," the man said, pointing at the cheap werewolf mask still on my face, "are the only protection. They filter what the echoes see. Without them, you'd already be tethered." We didn't speak on the way home. The streets were quiet, unnaturally so. Every passing shadow, every flicker of light felt like a potential threat. We avoided alleys, kept to main roads, constantly glancing back. But nothing followed. Back at the dorm, I locked the journal in my drawer. Evan collapsed into his bed, unaware of the night's terror. Clara sat beside him, clutching his hand, tears staining her costume. I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, the cheap werewolf mask still in my hand. That night, I understood. Halloween wasn't just a holiday. For some things, it was a signal, a hunting ground, a time when shadows could take form, and some echoes. Some would never rest. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through the blinds, but it didn't bring comfort. My hand still trembled as I reached for my phone. Messages from Clara and Evan filled the screen. They had made it home safely, but neither of them mentioned what had happened, and I wasn't sure I wanted them to. Halloween had passed, but the echoes lingered in my mind. Every shadow, every flicker of light felt like a potential threat. That night had changed everything. 3 days later, curiosity overcame fear. I reopened the journal. Its leather cover was cold to the touch, almost alive. Flipping through the pages, I realized the entries didn't just track locations or dates. They included observations about people, habits, routines, even emotional states. Some pages had notes in margins like, "The tethered hesitate before panic." Fear is the thread I understood then. The echoes weren't random. They were methodical, precise. They waited for recognition, fed on attention, and hunted through subtle human connections. I couldn't stop thinking about them, about the static, the threads, the burned forms behind the masks. I needed answers, but the journal offered only more questions. The following Halloween, 2023, I returned to the same streets, not to hunt, not to challenge, but to observe. The streets were busier, lit with cheerful orange and purple lights. Families carried candy baskets. College students paraded in costumes. Everything seemed normal. And then I saw a glimpse, a shadow at the end of Hawthorne Alley, movement too deliberate for a passerby. I froze. Heart pounding, I watched as a tall figure in a cracked porcelain mask stepped into a streetlight. No one noticed. No one reacted. I felt the threads again, faint, almost imperceptible, connecting me to something beyond human perception. And I realized the echoes were still out there, watching, waiting, patient as shadows, honing in on recognition, tethered to nothing yet present everywhere. I left the alley quickly, keeping my eyes on the streetlights, the reflections, and the subtle shifts of movement. I never touched the journal again. It sits locked in my apartment drawer, but some nights I feel its weight in my hand, as if it's urging me to remember, to prepare. Halloween will always bring them back. The echoes don't rest, and they never forget. I'd been dreaming of leaving my hometown since junior year of high school, and finally stepping onto Everwood State University's campus felt like stepping into another world. The towering brick buildings, the crisp autumn air, the smell of coffee drifting from the student union. It was overwhelming, but exhilarating. I spent the first 2 months trying to blend in, navigating classes, libraries, and dining halls without drawing too much attention. Yet, I was still painfully aware of how invisible I felt. Most days, I ate alone, flipping through my textbooks or scrolling on my phone, observing other students laughing and chatting in groups I wasn't a part of. That Halloween, my roommate, Leah, had gone home for the weekend. Left alone, I found myself sitting in the library, trying to focus on my psychology readings, while the campus slowly emptied around me. My bag of fun-sized Snickers sat neglected beside my notebook. I was so immersed in my books that I barely noticed 3 girls approaching me: Harper, Sienna, and Tara, all from my English literature seminar. Harper, the one who talked the most, leaned over my table with that bright, bubbly energy I'd always envied, but never quite understood. "Do you have plans tonight?" she asked. When I said no, her grin widened, almost predatory in its enthusiasm. They were heading to an off-campus Halloween party, she explained, and the host had asked them to bring extra people since several guests had canceled. Sienna and Tara nodded behind her, silent but expectant, their eyes sharp and calculating. Harper showed me the address on her phone: 1497 Holloway Lane, about a 15-minute drive from campus. Costume optional, she added, because of the short notice. For a moment, excitement sparked inside me. This could be my chance to break free from my awkward freshman shell, maybe finally feel like I belonged somewhere. The library's dim fluorescent lights and hushed whispers faded as I imagined the party. laughter, music, people enjoying themselves. Maybe, just maybe, I could finally have a night that wasn't just textbooks and isolation. Later, as I walked back to my dorm to prepare, I noticed a man following me. Dark green hoodie, the hood pulled tight, black jeans, scuffed brown boots that squeaked faintly with each step. I tried not to think about it. The campus was always crowded. But 20 minutes later, after detouring into the student union to grab a coffee, he was still there, 30 feet behind me, hunched slightly as if trying to make himself smaller, yet somehow impossible to ignore. I ducked into the campus bookstore and pretended to browse the sports section. I watched the entrance through the corner of my eye. He didn't enter. And when I finally stepped back into the open, he was gone. I tried to convince myself it was coincidence, some student walking the same route. But my gut screamed otherwise. The hours leading up to the party dragged. I changed outfits 3 times before settling on ripped black jeans and a dark green oversized sweater I'd thrifted. Comfortable, casual, yet presentable. My hands shook slightly as I made my way to Holloway Lane, the Uber driver struggling to locate the house through overgrown hedges and confusing street signs. When we arrived, the house loomed large and imposing. Glass, metal, and sharp angles, straight out of a magazine. But something about it felt wrong. Every window had thick blackout curtains, drawn tightly. Not a single gap to peer inside. Inside, Harper waved from across the room, a bright smile that didn't reach her eyes. Sienna and Tara flanked her, their posture stiff, almost synchronized, like marionettes. Madison, a girl I'd never met before, handed me a neon pink drink, too sweet, burning as it went down, and introduced me to a handful of people whose names I immediately forgot. All the while, everyone seemed to be watching me, not directly, but in a way that made my skin crawl. And then I saw him. The man from earlier, leaning against the kitchen counter, peeling a label off a beer bottle. Boots squeaking faintly, hoodie shadowing his face. My body went rigid. Madison noticed my stare and muttered, "He's Brandon, Harper's cousin visiting from out of town." I wanted to believe her, but Harper had frequently mentioned being an only child. No cousins. My stomach churned with dread. I excused myself to the bathroom, needing a moment alone. The hallway was dim, the single bulb at the far end flickering, casting long shadows that danced on the walls. I locked the bathroom door behind me, fumbling for my phone to call Leah. No signal. Wi-Fi. Only a network named 8GHTR2Z4 appeared, password protected. My reflection seemed wrong, darker, slightly distorted. Leaning closer, I thought I saw the outline of another room through the glass. Then came the footsteps. Slow, heavy. Outside the door. Keys jingled. Why would someone have keys to a bathroom at a party? I frantically searched the cabinet for anything to defend myself. Nothing. The footsteps paused, then receded. I waited, counting seconds, heart hammering in my chest. When I cracked the door, Harper, Sienna, and Tara moved with unnatural synchronization, their eyes empty, smiles gone. "We've been watching you," Harper said, her voice void of warmth. "You walk the same routes, eat at the same places, sit in the same spot in the library. You made it easy." Panic surged. My mind raced. I grabbed a ceramic pineapple lamp from the side table and hurled it through the front window. Glass shattered outward, an explosion of sound that snapped everyone from their choreographed movements for a moment. That was all I needed. I bolted, sliding past the 2 men guarding the door, fumbling with the deadbolt. Bursting into the cold night air, I screamed, primal and raw. Neighbors poured out of their houses, drawn by the sound. Brandon, Colin, I realized, hesitated when confronted by the sudden crowd. Phones dialed 911. I collapsed on the nearest driveway, trembling, clutching my arms, sobbing. The investigation revealed the horrifying truth. The house was an Airbnb, rented with a stolen credit card. Harper, Sienna, and Tara weren't students. They were part of a streaming ring, filming real horror scenarios with unsuspecting victims. Hidden cameras captured everything. Brandon's real identity was Colin, a man with prior assault convictions. Others had been targeted before me, but none had escaped. I finished the semester, changed dorms, and altered routines everywhere I went. I still cannot hear squeaky boots without a wave of nausea. I avoid parties hosted by strangers. Survival is sometimes all that matters. To live, and to ensure the monsters never get another chance. Halloween night, 2018 should have been just another ordinary evening. Instead, it became the night that seared into my mind the fragility of safety, the sharp reminder that even our homes aren't truly ours when someone with ill intent chooses us. I was 27, living with my girlfriend Clara in a small 2-bedroom rental on Ashwood Lane, Springfield, Massachusetts. The house was nothing special, a cookie-cutter 1970s build with thin walls, squeaky floors, and a porch that sagged slightly at one corner. But it was ours, and we had made it cozy in our quiet, routine-oriented way. Clara and I had been together for 3 years, and we shared a life that balanced normalcy and comfort. She was a dental hygienist, organized, precise, and meticulous. I worked as an insurance claims adjuster, more relaxed by nature, but obsessive when it came to security and minor details. Our routines included cooking dinner together most nights, binge-watching reality TV shows until exhaustion, and falling asleep on the couch. We had a cat, Mochi, a tiny gray tabby who usually wedged herself between us while we slept. That Halloween fell on a Wednesday. Clara had been looking forward to it for weeks. A new Italian restaurant had opened downtown, and she had booked a table well in advance. I was teasing her about wearing a fancy dress, and she mocked my reluctance to iron shirts properly. Deep down, though, I was excited for the evening. A proper date night, away from phones and routine, was a welcome break. We left our home around 6:30 p.m., just as the neighborhood streets began to fill with trick-or-treaters. Most of the kids were still shy, darting from house to house, laughing in tiny bursts and tugging at their parents' sleeves. Our porch light stayed off, as we weren't home to hand out candy. The air was crisp, the kind that hints at winter around the corner, carrying the faint smell of fallen leaves and burning pumpkins from neighbors' fire pits. Dinner was flawless. The restaurant had a warm, dimly lit atmosphere. Fake cobwebs hung in corners. Flickering candlelight cast shadows across the tables, and the smell of garlic, tomato sauce, and freshly baked bread filled the air. Clara wore a deep plum dress, her hair swept into a casual updo. I had ironed my shirt, even though I made a half-hearted joke about it. Our waiter, struggling to keep his plastic vampire fangs in place, made us laugh repeatedly. We lingered far longer than planned, enjoying homemade pasta, wine that we probably couldn't afford, and a tiramisu so rich it made my head spin slightly. There were no distractions, no phones, no screens, just conversation and laughter. We left the restaurant around 9:30, the streets quiet, almost unnervingly so. Most trick-or-treaters had gone home, leaving swaying decorations and empty sidewalks. On the drive home, I noticed how empty the usual suburban bustle was. Ashwood Lane, normally lively with laughter from late-night neighbors or the television noise from open windows, was eerily silent. Even Mr. Halloway, our next-door neighbor, had his house dark. He usually kept the volume of his police procedural shows far too high. When we pulled into our driveway, the sensation of normalcy was deceptive. I fished for the keys in my jacket pocket, the familiar jingling sound oddly comforting. The crisp night air was thick with the scent of decaying leaves, wet asphalt, and the faint smoke from a distant neighbor's fire pit. It was the calm before the storm, though I didn't know it yet. As I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the first thing I noticed was a smell. Sweet and artificial. Faint, but distinctive. Cheap chocolate, sour gummy candies, mixed with something metallic. It didn't immediately make sense. My first thought, raccoons. We'd had a few encounters with them, primarily raiding our trash cans. But then I saw it. Candy wrappers were everywhere. On the coffee table, the couch, the rug. A confetti-like mess. Clara's eyes went wide as she stepped in behind me, hand gripping my arm tightly. "What the hell?" she whispered, voice shaky. I motioned for her to stay by the front door while I investigated. Every creak of the floors echoed, making me jump. The back door, normally locked, was ajar, slightly open. No signs of forced entry, no broken locks. My stomach dropped. This was no raccoon. Someone had been inside. I moved slowly, flashlight in hand, toward the hallway that led to the guest room, a storage room we rarely used. Old textbooks, plastic bins, my golf clubs, miscellaneous clutter. This room was more for forgotten belongings than function. And yet, from inside, a faint glow was visible. A soft, rhythmic breathing reached my ears. Paired with the quiet buzz of a phone, it was clear that whoever was there wasn't perfect at hiding. I froze, heart pounding, realizing that someone had been inside, quietly, waiting. Every detail, the missing back door light bulb, the candy wrappers, the soft light from the guest room, told me this wasn't random. Someone had been watching. I motioned for Clara to stay back, whispering that I had a flashlight. The mag light felt heavy in my hand, but it was the only thing close enough to use as a weapon, or at least to make me feel like I had one. Each step towards the guest room felt impossibly slow, the creaks of the old hardwood beneath my feet sounding like deafening alarms. The door to the guest room was slightly open, the soft light spilling through the crack. My heart thumped in my chest, loud enough that I was certain the intruder could hear it. I exhaled slowly, trying to steady my breathing, trying to convince myself I wasn't about to meet someone armed, or worse. "Hello?" My voice trembled slightly, betraying the confidence I tried to project. No answer. I inched the door open, and the beam of the flashlight swept across the room. There, sitting in our old office chair, was a man. He looked ordinary. Mid-30s, brown hair sticking out from under a rumpled hoodie, patchy stubble, dark circles under his eyes. Not a monster, not someone wearing a mask, just a human being. And yet, my skin crawled. He froze when the flashlight hit him. For a second, our eyes locked, and I saw the shock, or was it disappointment, in his gaze. He wasn't angry, not immediately aggressive. He looked caught, tired, like a kid who had been doing something he knew was wrong and finally got busted. I noticed the mess around him. Candy wrappers strewn across the floor, an empty bag of chocolate on the desk, and a small, open backpack with my laptop peeking out. alongside Clara's jewelry box. He had been in here for a while, clearly rifling through our things. "Who? What are you doing?" My voice cracked, but I tried to hold it steady. He didn't answer, only shifted slightly, trying to squeeze through the narrow window behind him. One leg out, then the other. He moved fast, but clumsily, knocking over a box of old textbooks. My instincts kicked in. He wasn't expecting resistance. I lunged forward, but he dropped down into the yard before I could reach him. The thud of his landing echoed against the siding, followed by the scrape of his sneakers on the gravel. My stomach twisted as I ran to the window, but he had already disappeared into the alley. Darkness swallowed him whole. Clara appeared beside me, still on the phone with the dispatcher. Her face had shifted from fear to understanding. She saw the office chair facing the door, the flashlight beam trembling in my hand, and knew what I knew. He had been listening, waiting, deciding what to do. We stayed put, doors locked, phones clutched, trying to calm our racing hearts. The minutes stretched endlessly until the police arrived. 2 officers. Officer Daniels, an older man who looked like he'd seen everything, and Officer Alvarez, a younger, attentive woman. They searched the house thoroughly, noting the lack of forced entry, the missing light bulb outside, and the trail of candy wrappers. "He had to have had a key," Alvarez said finally. That revelation hit me harder than anything else. Someone with access. Someone we knew, or thought we knew. The officers took our statements, but I couldn't stop replaying the moment when I saw his face. So normal, so ordinary, so human. It was terrifying precisely because it reminded me that danger doesn't always look like a horror movie villain. Sometimes it's someone completely mundane, and that mundanity is what makes them unpredictable. The investigation revealed small, unsettling details, footprints that didn't match anyone in our neighborhood, CCTV footage from nearby streets showing a dark figure loitering outside our house for nearly an hour before we returned. He had been watching, waiting, studying our routines, our patterns. Clara and I spent the rest of the night unable to sleep. Every creak of the floors, every gust of wind against the windows, felt amplified. I kept a mag light beside the bed, flashlight on, ready to confront anything. Our cat, Mochi, refused to settle, pacing nervously between us. In the following days, our lives felt invaded in ways that weren't tangible. We changed locks, installed cameras, motion sensors, and even extra lighting in the yard. Every sound, a truck passing by, a squirrel scurrying on the roof, a neighbor's late-night laughter, sent a spike of adrenaline through me. Sleep was shallow, filled with dreams of shadowy figures slipping through our back door. Weeks passed, but the sense of vulnerability lingered. The police continued their investigation, following leads, running checks on local break-ins, and attempting to trace the key. The idea that someone had been inside our home while we were out, rifling through our belongings, without leaving signs of forced entry, kept me awake more than anything. And then came the follow-up call from Officer Alvarez. She said they'd identified the man, sort of. His name was Ethan Rowe, a transient with a record of minor thefts and trespassing. He had no fixed address, no ties to us, no clear motive beyond opportunism. The police couldn't press charges for anything beyond trespassing and theft of small items, but the implications were larger. The unnerving part? They found similar reports in nearby towns. Ethan, or someone like him, had been targeting homes that were empty for the evening. Halloween especially, because homeowners were out. and the attention on decorations made them blend into the festive chaos. I began noticing patterns in our lives that I hadn't before. The times we left, how we approached routines, which windows were vulnerable, even the path Mochi took when chasing shadows. Every mundane detail suddenly seemed like a potential threat vector. Clara, ever the rational one, tried to ground me. "We're safe now," she said repeatedly, even though her own hands trembled when she adjusted the locks. We shared a silent agreement. Never leave doors unlocked again. Never assume safety. Never take normalcy for granted. Yet, despite precautions, I couldn't shake the paranoia. Every visitor, every knock at the door sent a jolt of fear through me. Every phone vibration, every unexpected noise in the house made me jump. We had survived that night, yes, but survival came at the cost of a lingering, gnawing awareness that the world was far less predictable than I had imagined. The days after Halloween felt unreal. Clara and I spent hours discussing what had happened, dissecting every decision we'd made, every step we'd taken that night. We reviewed our routines obsessively, noting times we left the house, how long we stayed out, how visible our windows were from the street. Every small habit suddenly became a potential vulnerability. Our neighbors noticed the change immediately. Mr. Brennan, our usually chatty next-door neighbor, came over one evening with a plate of cookies. "You two look like you haven't slept in a week," he said. We tried to laugh it off, but he didn't miss the haunted look in our eyes. Even friendly greetings now felt loaded, every passerby a possible observer. The police continued their investigation, but progress was slow. Ethan Rowe's transient lifestyle made him impossible to track. They urged us to upgrade our security, which we did. More cameras, motion sensors, reinforced locks, even a doorbell camera that sent alerts to our phones. But technology provided only a veneer of safety. The psychological impact lingered far longer than the physical. Clara started sleeping with her phone beside her, flashlight app ready, and I found myself walking through the house at odd hours, checking windows, listening for the softest sound. Every noise outside, every creak in the floorboards, triggered a rush of adrenaline. I knew logically that we were safe now, that the police were involved, that our precautions were robust, but logic didn't erase instinct. We began to notice changes in the neighborhood too. Kids who had once run freely trick-or-treating were now shepherded closely by parents. Homeowners installed lights, cameras, and motion sensors, transforming the streets into a landscape of surveillance. The incident at our house had sparked awareness that hadn't existed before, a realization that Halloween, with all its fun and costumes, could also hide risks we hadn't imagined. Months passed, but the shadow of that night never fully lifted. Clara suggested we move to a different neighborhood, somewhere with less anonymity, more community vigilance. The idea made sense, but leaving a place you've called home, even temporarily, is emotionally complicated. That rental, cookie cutter as it was, held memories beyond fear. Our shared dinners, quiet nights watching reality TV, the familiarity of creaking floors. Leaving felt like admitting that normal life could never fully return. Even after we upgraded security, I found myself noticing details that I hadn't before. How the streetlights cast shadows across driveways, how a neighbor's tree branch scraped against the window at night, how distant sirens carried in a way that made me tense. Our house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a place constantly on alert. Every step inside it was calculated, every noise analyzed. Clara coped in her own way. She took up yoga, meditation, and mindfulness exercises. She insisted we talk openly about our fears, which helped, but even she couldn't fully erase the lingering unease. On particularly quiet nights, I'd catch her sitting by the window, looking out at the street, staring at the dark shapes of yards and fences, as if trying to spot threats before they appeared. I realized that survival isn't always about a physical escape. That night, the adrenaline and instincts had saved us, but the real battle was psychological, and it stretched far beyond a single encounter. I became hyper-aware of routine patterns, of strangers' movements, of the possibility that someone could be watching, just as Ethan had. I learned that safety is never absolute. It's a balance between vigilance and normalcy, between caution and the courage to live without constant fear. Halloween came around again the next year, and we stayed home. The night was quiet, the streets still decorated with lights and cobwebs, but I couldn't shake the memory of that intruder, sitting silently, waiting, deciding what to do. We didn't hand out candy, didn't answer the door for strangers. The celebration of community felt foreign, almost threatening, as if every shadow contained hidden observers. Yet there were lessons buried in the fear. I learned how strong Clara and I were as a team, how our instincts could align perfectly in a life or death moment. I learned that ordinary people, tired, desperate, seemingly unremarkable, can create extraordinary terror. And I learned the value of vigilance without paranoia, of preparation without obsession. Even now, years later, I can't hear a creak in the house or a gust of wind outside without flinching. Every unfamiliar car, every figure on the sidewalk still sparks a moment of tension. But we survived, and that survival carries its own quiet power. I often think about that night, and what could have happened if I hadn't acted, if Clara hadn't stayed calm. The fear remains, but so does resilience. Halloween 2018 changed us in ways both visible and invisible. It reminded me that our homes, no matter how familiar, can be vulnerable, and that vigilance and quick thinking can make the difference between being a victim and walking away. As for Ethan Rowe, we never saw him again. The police eventually closed the case due to lack of further evidence, but the lessons remained, etched into our habits, our awareness, our nightly routines. And perhaps that is the true scar left behind, the understanding that safety is fragile and that vigilance is the price of living in a world where the ordinary can be frightening. Halloween had always been the highlight of my year. I wasn't just a fan. I planned months in advance. In August, I would be sketching costumes in notebooks, plotting the most efficient candy routes, memorizing which neighbors gave out full-size chocolate bars. In October 2016, I was 15, living with my mom, Lisa, and younger brother, Aiden, in a quiet suburban street in Beaverton, Oregon. Our street, Willowbrook Lane, was that picture-perfect neighborhood where neighbors knew each other's names, borrowed hedge trimmers, and left freshly baked cookies on porches. Halloween here wasn't just a night, it was a competition. Pumpkins, fake cobwebs, motion-activated skeletons, and inflatable ghosts were everywhere. Except for one house, number 532, a single-story ranch with faded gray siding. Everyone knew the resident as Mr. Callahan, a man who had lived there longer than anyone could remember. Quiet, solitary, and never social. Yet every Halloween, like clockwork, Mr. Callahan decorated his porch. 2 carved pumpkins, orange lights along the doorway, a small wreath on the door. It looked festive from a distance, but no matter how many kids knocked or shouted, "Trick or treat," he never answered. Lights on inside, the flicker of a TV through the curtains, but silence at the door. Kids learned quickly to avoid the place, whispering rumors of the weird old man who didn't want anyone on his porch. For me, it didn't make sense. Why decorate if you weren't going to hand out candy? Why go through the effort just to be ignored? My friend Logan, a mischievous kid with sandy hair, swore Mr. Callahan was conducting Halloween experiments, testing how far kids would go. Logan's older brother, Ethan, had a car and a patchy mustache he thought was impressive. One October, Ethan decided they'd pull the ultimate prank on Mr. Callahan. They recruited me, Logan, and Sophie, a fearless girl in our grade. Our plan was classic teen mischief: toilet paper the trees, smash a pumpkin or two, ring the doorbell repeatedly, then bolt. Stupid, harmless fun, or so we thought. The night came with a crisp autumn breeze and the scent of wet leaves. Most trick-or-treaters had gone home by 9 p.m., and the street had a quiet, eerie feel. Ethan drove us in his old Honda Civic, pulling into a side street a few blocks away. Logan practically vibrated with excitement, while Sophie, checking her phone, seemed bored but willing. We approached Mr. Callahan's house from the side yard, avoiding the main porch and its obvious security camera, a small black dome fixed under the eaves, angled toward the sidewalk. Another camera caught the side yard, its lens glinting faintly in the street lights. By the time we reached the backyard, we noticed a third camera, its red light blinking softly, aimed straight at the patio and sliding glass door. I felt that familiar knot in my stomach, the one that tells you something is wrong. But curiosity and adolescent bravado pushed us forward. Ethan walked boldly to the back door, rapped his knuckles hard against the wood. Silence. The house seemed frozen. The TV flickered faintly through the front window, yet no one moved. Ethan peered through the small window at the top of the door. He froze, eyes wide. "There's papers," he whispered, "covering the walls." Logan and I looked. Hundreds, maybe thousands of sheets, plastered over every surface we could see through the glass. Photographs, printouts, charts. All of them meticulously arranged. I couldn't comprehend it at first. Then I realized the images were of our street, our neighbors, and us. People going about their lives, captured over years. Faces, routines, houses, gardens. Every detail was cataloged. My hands went cold. "We need to leave," I whispered. But Logan, ever stubborn, edged closer, trying to see more. Sophie grabbed my arm, her face pale. The thrill of Halloween was gone. It had been replaced by something darker, something deeply wrong. At that moment, I understood. Mr. Callahan wasn't just a recluse. He was watching, observing, documenting every move of every family on the street. The cameras weren't for security. They were for him, for the unknown purpose behind the obsessive, disturbing collection. And we had trespassed into his world. The chill in the air felt heavier as we lingered near the patio. My stomach churned, partly from fear, partly from guilt. Sophie kept nudging me, whispering that we should leave, but none of us moved. Logan, ever the thrill seeker, edged closer to the sliding glass door, pressing his ear to the cold glass. I think there's more than just photos," he said, his voice trembling. "Look, computers, boxes, binders. He's cataloging everything." I followed his gaze. Through the dim light, I could see a corner of the kitchen stacked with filing cabinets, each drawer slightly ajar, papers spilling over, labeled folders with names, dates, and strange symbols. My brain couldn't process it. At first, I thought maybe he was some kind of obsessive hobbyist, collecting street scenes or snapshots of neighbors for some odd project. But the scale, the detail, it wasn't a hobby, it was a surveillance operation. Then something clicked in my mind. The cameras, 3 in the front, 1 on the side, 1 in the backyard. There were probably more. Inside, through the glass, I glimpsed cords and wires snaking along the walls, connected to monitors, possibly recording devices. The realization made my hands sweat. He wasn't just watching our street. He was tracking people, documenting their lives for years. "Guys," Sophie's voice was barely audible. She pointed to a small table near the sliding door. There were envelopes, each with a photo taped to the front. Some were adults, most were children. Each one had notes in messy handwriting: favorite color, routines, who they lived with, what time they left the house in the morning. My chest tightened. This wasn't harmless. This wasn't just creepy. It was dangerous. Logan, despite himself, leaned closer. "Do you think he's... kidnapping?" The word barely left his lips before a sound made us all freeze. A soft click, a creak of floorboards. Someone was inside. Not moving TV furniture, not shuffling papers, just stepping carefully, aware we were outside. I grabbed Sophie's arm. "We need to go. Now." But Logan shook his head. "We came this far. We need to know." Before I could argue, a shadow moved past the kitchen window. A man, mid-40s, average build, wearing a gray hoodie. He froze, seeming to study the backyard. The red light on the nearby camera blinked in the darkness. He wasn't aggressive. Not yet. Just watching. My mind raced. Was this Mr. Callahan or someone else? The thought of him noticing us made my blood run cold. Ethan, standing frozen, whispered, "Don't move." The man disappeared from the window. Seconds later, the faintest sound of a sliding chair came from inside the house, followed by the muffled clatter of papers. Panic rose in my chest. Whatever he was doing, it was deliberate. He knew we were out there. Sophie grabbed my hand. "We're leaving." She pulled me toward the side gate. Logan hesitated, then followed, muttering something about wanting proof. As we slipped through the fence into the neighbor's yard, a van's headlights glinted down the street. Not a vehicle I recognized. 2 figures got out, moving quickly toward the house. Our hearts sank. These weren't homeowners or concerned neighbors. These were professionals. We ducked behind a hedge, barely daring to breathe. Through the branches, I could see them enter the yard, heading straight toward the sliding glass door. One leaned close to the window, peering inside. Another fiddled with what looked like a device in his hand. They weren't stealing candy or vandalizing. They were checking something. Suddenly, Ethan whispered, "We have to call someone." Police. Now we fumbled for our phones, trying not to alert the men. Sophie's hands were shaking so badly, I had to hold her phone for her. My fingers felt frozen as I dialed 911. The operator's calm voice over the line contrasted sharply with the terror roaring in my chest. "We're outside. 532 Willowbrook Lane. People are inside. Watching. Possibly dangerous." Minutes felt like hours. The men moved around inside, occasionally glancing out the window toward the backyard. I could hear the faintest clicks, as if they were checking security cameras or alarms. One of them muttered something unintelligible, their words swallowed by the night. Then, just as suddenly as they appeared, they vanished into the house again. We pressed ourselves flat against the hedge, barely daring to look. The quiet stretched, heavy and unnatural. The only sound was the distant rustle of leaves and the faint hum of televisions from neighboring homes. Finally, we heard sirens. Faint at first, then growing louder. Lights flashed across the street. Police cars. Our relief was immediate, but it was tempered by fear. What if they were gone by the time the officers arrived? The police swarmed the yard moments later, officers knocking loudly at the front and side doors. We watched, frozen, as a man, smaller than I expected, balding, wearing a cardigan, was led out in handcuffs. He didn't resist. He didn't shout. He just looked. Resigned. Over the next hour, more officers arrived, removing boxes, computers, filing cabinets, and surveillance equipment. The full scope of the operation became clear. Mr. Callahan hadn't been working alone. His house, his cameras, his obsessive cataloging. It had been part of a network. They found evidence of other adults coordinating with him. The purpose? Targeting children in the neighborhood, documenting routines, and sharing the information with others. Sophie, Logan, and I sat in Ethan's car, shaking and pale. We couldn't believe it. The man we joked about pranking, the quiet neighbor who had seemed harmless, was part of something horrifying. Our curiosity could have gotten us caught, or worse. But our report had been timely. One of the children identified in the folders, another local boy, was rescued from a location across the river in Vancouver, Washington. He was alive, shaken, but safe. The police later told us that without our intervention, the outcome could have been catastrophic. I couldn't sleep that night. My favorite holiday, the one I'd obsessed over for years, was tainted forever. The decorations, the lights, the cheerful atmosphere, they all carried a weight now. Every neighbor, every porch, every flickering jack-o'-lantern could hide something sinister. The following days were a blur. News vans lined Oakmont Drive. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains. Everyone whispered, pointed, speculated. But none of us knew the full extent. Police were tight-lipped, referring only to an ongoing investigation involving multiple juveniles. School was surreal. Hallways that had once felt safe now seemed like traps. Every glance over my shoulder, every knock on a locker, sent my pulse spiking. Troy's parents had moved him temporarily to a cousin's home in another city. Amber's older sister checked in constantly, making sure we weren't traumatized, though I doubt she could imagine the terror we felt. The news eventually released more details. Mr. Callahan hadn't acted alone. He was part of a network, a web of adults across several counties, each with a role: surveillance, targeting, abduction, distribution of stolen information. It was like a twisted business, meticulously planned, horrifyingly efficient. The house in Vancouver, the place where the other children were held, was a warehouse-like property on the edge of the city. Police described it as cold and sterile, filled with shelves of binders and files detailing routines of dozens of children. Nothing explicit or physical had occurred to them yet, but the potential was terrifying. Some of the children were missing for days, maybe weeks. Troy had been there less than 24 hours when authorities raided the location, which saved him from a fate we can only imagine. The network had been operating undetected for years. Every child on Oakmont Drive had been photographed, studied, categorized. Every moment. Bus stops, after-school routines, playgrounds, meticulously documented. The police were clear. If we hadn't discovered the cameras, none of this would have come to light for years, maybe decades. The thought made my stomach turn. I remember walking past Mr. Callahan's house after the raid. It sat quietly, ordinary, almost mocking in its normalcy. The jack-o'-lanterns had been removed. The lawn was bare. But I knew better now. Evil doesn't announce itself with flashing lights or loud noises. It hides in plain sight. Weeks later, Oakmont Drive slowly returned to some semblance of normalcy. Families installed their own security systems. Porch lights stayed on later than usual. Children hesitated a little before running from house to house. Even my mom started locking doors we'd always left unlocked. Halloween, once a celebration, had become a reminder. A reminder that even in the safest neighborhoods, danger could be waiting just a few doors down. Troy eventually moved with his family, unable to remain on Oakmont Drive. Amber and I stayed, but I never felt safe walking past that street again. Every shadow, every flicker of a porch light felt heavy with suspicion. Logan transferred schools the following year, claiming he couldn't deal with the attention. Years later, whenever I think about Halloween, I don't remember the costumes, the candy, the spooky decorations. I remember the cameras, the walls plastered with photographs, the quiet figure watching from the window. The calculated way they observed, waiting for the perfect opportunity. Trust, I realized, is a fragile thing. You think you know your neighbors, your street, your community, but appearances are deceiving. Monsters don't always hide in the dark. Sometimes they live 5 doors down, wave politely when you check the mail, and smile while documenting your every move. Even now, whenever I pass an unfamiliar house with lights on, I feel that creeping weight. Halloween will never feel the same. Every decoration, every flicker of orange light carries a reminder. Vigilance matters, and curiosity. Sometimes curiosity is what saves lives. The lessons of Oakmont Drive are haunting. Security is more than locks and cameras. Awareness, communication, and action. Those are what protect us. And unfortunately, even then, the world is full of people who manipulate the ordinary to hide extraordinary darkness. For anyone watching this story unfold on your screen, know this. Sometimes, horror isn't in a mask, a shadow, or a haunted house. Sometimes, horror is calculated, methodical, and perfectly mundane. And sometimes, being alert, brave, and willing to act, like we did that night, means the difference between life and death.